So what I've done here on a piece of foam core, just regular foam core like you'd use in the back of a photograph or a picture, whatever. Picture frame. Okay, so what I've done, I've just measured every 6 inches down that straight edge for the top. I've done the same thing in the boat on that 2x4 runner on that bunk. And then I've measured vertically and picked up measurements, every 6 inches, and then it just drew me a line for the curve. And this is just on a piece of foam board. And I'll cut that as my first starting point for a template. I'll have to notch in the boat around my floor frames and tweak it possibly, but this should get me started here for a template. It's not long enough to do the whole thing. I'll cut this one and get this one fitted, then I'll extend it on out. And here in the boat, like I said, I've done the same thing. I've just measured vertically every 6 inches, put a mark every 6 inches down, and picked up measurements. Now, once I get it in here, I'm gonna just hand notch around the floors. And this doesn't have to fit absolutely perfectly. The floorboards or the sole is 3/4 inch thick, and it'll lay against this and actually cover up that bottom edge of it, and then it'll be tabbed in from the inside. And then you can see here how I've just got to take and trim around the floor there and there to get it to drop down in place, and then it should drop down pretty close. But the foam board or foam core is pretty easy way to, you can cut it with a razor knife. Pretty easy way to make templates. You can get it in 1/8 inch or 3/16. Most of the time in pretty much any of the craft stores. And then there you can see fitted around the floors. And like I said, the 3/4 inch floor sits on top of this and comes up on this a bit. So now I've got to cut my piece to go down there. And going through my other shop, through all my drops from other projects, I've got 4 pieces of mahogany, 1/4 inch mahogany veneered plywood here. I'm going to use that in this boat too. So it's looks like it's maybe a birch or something on the back. It's not marine grade plywood. I brought my little table saw up from another shop where I wouldn't have to carry my pieces so far. I'm just ripping up this mahogany 1/4 inch plywood. Those are my templates that I cut earlier out of some scrap. Well, there's that mahogany, 1/4 inch mahogany plywood, just dry fitted down through there. There will be a joint way back there. There's a joint. I didn't have anything long enough, so I had to piece it. But I'll reinforce that. Everything's going to be fiberglass as well. Like I said, that's just dry fitted in, just make sure everything's going to fit right, and it does. I will completely saturate all of the edges and the back and the face of this with thin epoxy. Let it soak into it good, and then on the back side it'll get completely glassed. On the storage compartment side, it'll be completely glassed, as well as tabbed in with glass cloth to the hull. Here's the back side of the mahogany plywood. There's the face side. What I'm going to do, I'm going to coat this with just a thin coat of epoxy, and then I'm going to take this 1708 biaxial cloth and lay over it and saturate that in epoxy, just to stiffen this panel up and to waterproof the back side of it, where it'll be facing the storage, to give it a little bit of resistance to stuff banging against and stuff in there. Then once that kicks off a little bit, I'll flip it over and take a razor knife and trim it before it gets hard to the shape of the wood. I'll do that all 4 pieces, and then I'll glue them in the boat. And then on that bottom edge, I'll put I think I've got some fiberglass tape around here somewhere, some 3 inch and some 6 inch or something like that, or 4 inch and 6 inch or something. and then I'll probably just use that to tape that to the hole at the bottom. Be a good place to use that stuff up. Okay, I got those panels sanded out, got them glued and screwed in. I put some screws up high where my trim piece will cover up the screws. You know, I'm gonna put a piece of mahogany lumber right here that'll hold my cushion in place. That'll, you know, come up a little ways there like that and cover up those screws. Sanded the back side as well. That's the side that's got the 1708 biaxial cloth on it, and that's been sanded out and wiped down with acetone. I'm going to put a bit of thickened epoxy in here as a fillet down in there to kind of give me a little bit of a rounded edge from a glass cloth, and then I'm going to tab that in down there. So that'll give me my good strong side for storage bumping against it. And then this side has been coated with epoxy resin and sanded out. And then I've just got some temporary spacers dropped in the hole here to keep my spacing right, so that when I tab them in, they won't get pushed in without me realizing it. So that hopefully will keep it spaced evenly, so my floorboards will be the same width. Okay, I took and mixed up some epoxy resin with colloidal silica to make my fillet in here, and I put a little bit of fairing compound in it just to make it sticky where it stays where I put it and doesn't sag. I don't put much in it, but anyway, so I've got that in there. Of course, I've got both sides. This side's a little harder to see because my light's not shining in here, but anyway, I've got it all done. And of course, that's back in behind these panels here, and I've squeezed it in until I had squeeze out coming out on the back side, so the whole void is completely filled with that thickened epoxy filler. So I have a good solid joint underneath there where water won't stand. And now, while it's still wet and tacky, I'm gonna go ahead and wet out some cloth and put cloth tabbing over that where it'll bond to it and fill in voids. It's a little bit easier than if I let it cure, then I gotta sand it and all that. So I go ahead and try to do it all back to back wet as much as possible. Cut down on the sanding. Well, I'm trying to make a pattern, or getting ready to make a pattern or template for my starboard bunk. And this is just some real thin, I think that's 4 mil plywood, Luan. I've just done what I've done before. I've just measured length. This edge is straight, I know that, and I know the overall length is 83, so that's a given. And then I've just measured every 6 inches and put me a mark. And then I got widths. I measured widths and just put my width every 6 inches, and then I just connected a line to that. I didn't even bother springing a batten around it. I just drew it straight, just straight segments. I'm gonna cut it with my skill saw, and I'll use the skill saw, to try to fare out the curve a bit. And then there's the length overall. And like I said, this is just my rough initial template. If it fits, great. If it doesn't, then I'll just hot glue in little pieces or whatever I need to do to tweak it. But with a little bit of luck, it'll be good enough on the first pass. This will be the template for the bottom side of the 1/2-inch plywood that I'm going to be putting on. Okay, there it is cut. One thing, when you try to cut a curve with a skill saw, you just set your blade so that it just cuts just ever so slightly deeper than the material. If you try to set it too deep, it'll bind up on you. But if you set it shallow so that it's just barely clearing the material, it does a pretty good job usually. I've got a couple of little tiny hard spots I can see in it that I'm gonna just trim off just a touch, and then I'll be ready to take it in there and see how it fits. Well, it actually fits amazingly well for a first try. Where that old bulkhead was at, the tabbing is thick right there, so I've got to It's kind of hard to see. I've got to take out just a tiny bit of my plywood right there I didn't take into consideration that extra thick little bit of tabbing right there, so I've got to take out just a tiny bit right there. So I've marked the top of the sheet with my pattern, which would be the bottom of the sheet. And so what I've done is just try to calculate out the width I need to be based on my angle. And then I'm going to draw another fair curve as best I can. You know, at 45 degrees, it'd be a 1/2 inch, for example. And then it just gets a little wider as the angle gets steeper, and a little wider and a little wider and a little wider, and it's on down to like 1.5 inches down here where it'll be undercut, you know, drastically down here. So I'm going to spring a batten between all those lines and draw that line, and then I'm going to cut as much of it as I can with my skill saw. And then the balance of it I'm going to cut with my skill saw, and then come back and finish undercutting it with a bandsaw or jigsaw or something. Here's my cutouts to get access to storage underneath. Okay, there it is, cut and dry fitted. Fits pretty good. And you can see I use my frames to support the two ends of the shelves. And I will glue a cleat underneath the 1/2 inch plywood front and back to support the other two sides of the shelf. My pattern for this side is ever so slightly bigger, wider on this side, back toward the back, but it's really close. So I'll be able to just trim it a little bit and reuse that same pattern for that side, and do just a mirror image like that. So you can get an idea there now what it's kind of be like. Still got to put my countertop over that, and then I'm going to epoxy seal all of the edges and surfaces of this piece of plywood here, and I'm going to use white bilge paint and paint inside those storage areas before I put that plywood top on that bunk. It's just a lot easier to get to it without that top on it. There's my pattern cut for the port side. And while these panels are pretty big, having this overhead sliding hatch that opens twice, so it really opens back a long ways. And I don't even have it pushed all the way back right now. I've got to make an adjustment to the track. But that gives me enough room to get this panel in and out without too much trouble at all. And with it slid further back, there's not much I couldn't get in here. It's huge. Well, if I lay out this other panel, if I flip my AC plywood over, this is actually the back, and it looks pretty daggum good. There's one little place right there where the veneer's got a little sliver out of it, but other than that, it looks pretty good. I remember it's going to be painted. But if I flip it over like that, I can get my other one out of it, just barely. But that saves me from cutting the whole sheet. And I mean, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not even thinking twice about it. That's what I'm going to do. I can, like it's going to be painted, I can easily just fill that little crack in the veneer. And I'll be undercutting it just like that one was, so that will just barely fit. So, good deal. About 1/4 inch of scrap. And I'm cutting out my storage compartment lids or hatches, and I'm just using the skill saw and just drop cutting through, and then taking the jigsaw and cutting the corners. And then I'll take and sand the opening, and then also sand the plug here, the cutout. I'll sand it down smooth and radius the edges and all that, and drill a hole in the middle, and that'll make my lid right back in. This plywood, it was sold as a 1/2 inch AC exterior plywood. It looks like it's also rated as underlayment, but it's 15/32, 1/2 inch nominal. Exterior AC, And to me, it looks more like an AB than AC, but it was sold as AC, and the price was very reasonable for this. And there's no voids in it. I have found not a single void in any cutout I've made so far. A very, very stiff panel, very flat panel. I'm using these little paint standoffs. I printed those on my 3D printer. They work pretty good. Let's see if you can see underneath there. Just holds it up so I don't glue my piece to the plastic or to the tabletop. Well, that's the back side of port bunk. I took and it's all sanded down good, and I put epoxy West Systems epoxy resin on it. The plywood soaks it up pretty good. I put 2 coats on all the edges, the end grain, and that is bevels and stuff. All that's got 2 coats working, soak in real good.